All right, welcome to the Tribal Crisis Response Training Program Peer Coaching Web Conference. This is going to be the first of several Train the Trainer peer coaching web conferences for this program. And my slide won't advance. Okay. There we go. We have a brief agenda. We're going to go through introductions of the project staff and the purpose of the web conference we just covered, and then some information about conducting your own tribal crisis response training. The project staff are as follows: Raquel Myers, I'm a staff attorney with National Indian Justice Center; Carol Oliva, the development specialist with NIJC; Christy Garcia, program specialist with NIJC; Ben Myers, staff attorney with NIJC; Will Marling, a victim assistance consultant who's been working with this program since its beginning. Hi there, did somebody just join the call?
Hey there, it's Dory.
Hey Dory, we were just starting. You are actually the only one of the peer trainers who made it, so we were just going to start recording. But you came at a very apropos time. I was just doing introductions of the project staff, most of whom you've heard from before on other projects, with the exception of Ben Myers, who is our newest staff attorney at NIJC and Auntie's nephew. We'll put it that way.
I was like,
There's a relationship there, that last name. And then by way of introduction for the trainers who have volunteered to become the Tribal Crisis Response Trainers is yourself from Tuolumne, Tribal CERT, Frank Canizales, also from Miwok, Director of Social Services, Rachel Maurice, who's the Assistant Director of Victim Services at Riverside County, and Melissa Donaldson, who is the Director of Victim Services at Riverside County. Overall, the purpose of this particular web conference is to initiate the peer training and peer support for those who volunteer to be the trainers. And our hope is that after several of these webinars that we'll be able to identify components of the training program that you may be able to deliver in your own community to local volunteers that could possibly become part of a tribal crisis response team, or maybe those who are just interested in what the team does. So this type of web conference will become part of our strategy to encourage folks to engage in the training and possibly bring it back home to their communities. And so we'll have several more of these as we move forward. And just so that you know, Dory, they actually contacted us last week, and they've extended this training out to, is it 2018, I think, Carol? So we have a couple of years left in front of us to continue to develop the curriculum and offer the trainings.
It's
awesome.
March 31st, 2019.
Oh, 2019. I try not to have anything calendared that far in advance. Okay, so for those of you who volunteered, what we have in our plan, this is our work plan for the project, and what we're hoping to exact from those volunteer trainers is to attend 4 one-hour peer coaching web conferences, and you can choose any one of your 4, to engage in an MOU with NIJC that basically spells out that our hopes for the project and what we would want you to do in terms of attending the web conferences and then delivering training in your region, and our responsibilities for supporting you with technical assistance, materials, and any other way that we can through the project. What we're hoping for is that we can deliver at least 8 hours of office-based TA for each one of the trainers. And of course, if you need anything more from us, that's not a problem. That's just our minimum that we're going to do. And then delivery of a training session in your community, and it could be a component of the overall curriculum, or it could be the entire curriculum itself, depending on what your community needs. And then the last real administrative task is documenting your hours, and we have a timesheet that we can provide you. That's in Excel, but really any timesheet where you can describe the time that you put in would be helpful, and then we include that with our reports back to Cal OES. Any questions at all about those technical requirements? So So in a nutshell, 4 of these webinars, the MOU, which we'll send out to you, and it's just to establish what the duties and responsibilities of everybody concerned are going to be, getting TA from our training program, delivering of the session, and documenting using the timesheet or a timesheet. Okay, so conducting your training. Overall, the curriculum, which you've already been through in the classroom, consists of 4 components. The first component, the California Tribal Communities Essential Knowledge, is really designed to address folks that are coming outside of tribal communities into tribal communities during crisis response or planning crisis response. So it's really about trying to understand tribal culture, but also how to ask the questions when you need to learn information or figure out who to talk to. The second component is pre-crisis, preparing for a crisis, crisis prevention, education strategies. The third is responding to victims in a crisis or active crisis management. And the fourth is post-crisis programming and education strategies. So you have education strategies is falling in both sections 2 and 4. That's not a mistake. Now, within that first segment, which is something that I think that a lot of the tribal members who volunteered to be the peer trainers would be a very good section to deliver. And particularly in your case, Dory, because you can tailor it either to Tuolumne or to other communities that you worked with, I think that really is something that Cal OES was hoping to get out of this. And in our feedback so far during the pilot trainings, the folks that have attended from the DA's offices have really highlighted this as being something that they needed to know. So as we go through, we'll do recordings of different segments. And if you are willing, when you do your delivery of your training, we might have the webinar running in the background to record it, and we can take pieces out and add it into those sections. So when we're looking at the essential knowledge for California tribal communities, it really was to provide kind of a backdrop, if you will, before looking at an individual community. So the demographics of California tribes, historical and generational trauma, things that might complicate matters in crisis response. Community social structures for communication, knowing and understanding that not every community is the same, but they are significantly different than the surrounding communities, non-Indian communities. And then isolating focal points for preservation and rescue, knowing and understanding that there might be people, places, even plants and animals that would be a focal point for a rescue that the community members might be willing to do themselves, and knowing how to deal with those particular strategies. In the pre-crisis and preparing for the crisis, it's knowledge about how to form a crisis response team, their roles, basically providing a structure for the team, focusing on a victim-centered crisis response plan that takes into account the historic trauma, the PTSD, any sort of alcohol or substance issues that could be plaguing the community. A trauma-informed crisis response for victims, particularly victims that may have special needs, more on the mental health and physical health side. Prevention of contagions and clusters, and this is particular to the suicide clusters that we've experienced in Indian country. And then looking at the public health model, risk and protective factors that we can use for injury prevention, and hopefully include that as part of the team preparation. The third is responding to victims in crisis, and you probably remember that pretty well. That was looking at different case scenarios that have impacted Indian country, and there's a bullet list here from active shooters, suicide clusters, environmental disasters, different unique tribal events or crises events. The fourth one, the post-crisis programming and education strategies, is really about understanding any sort of debriefing strategy that you can integrate culturally relevant, trauma-informed information into. And understanding that the role there is about trying to make sure that the people who are part of the crisis response are also engaged in a debriefing strategy that doesn't further traumatize them. coordinated community response, opportunities, limitations on educational distribution outreach channels, so knowing and understanding how tribal community members and community that have been affected by the crisis will actually receive and obtain their information. And then the dreaded statement about whether or not we have internet accessibility and whether or not the social media is actually going to be very effective in dealing with post-crisis education strategies. Okay, so this is really more of what we want to deliver to you today, which is how you can go about selecting the component. So it's our hope that you'll be able to tell us when you select a component that there is a need that's being met by that. So if you're selecting the first component, which is all about that tribal information, then the need really may be trying to make sure that community members understand how they can communicate with non-Indians who may be coming in with crisis response teams, or communicating directly to those folks from your local DA's office who could be involved in crisis response. There may be more in the way of looking at the active shooter or those individual tribal crises events to make the tribal community members know and understand the role of the crisis response team when they're coming on site to help with those matters. So whichever component you choose is clearly up to you, but if you do choose one, can you communicate what the need you'll be addressing is? And that can be for your community, for people outside of your community who might be working with your community, as long as we can convey how that component's being used and what the purpose that it's being used for is. Okay, the next one is how can we help each other? So it's interesting to me that we can be support for you, Dory, but I don't think you need us. So one of the things that I look at is how can we support the delivery of the training. I think you're fully briefed in all of these areas more so than we are, but if there's any way that we can assist, whether it's from the delivery of the materials, providing additional materials or even tools like evaluations so that we can measure the impact pre and post, anything that you want to do that might tie into any existing work that you have or any existing projects that you may be working on. So consider all things going on in your community when you decide to actually convey the training, or anybody, like Frank does his. If there's a way that we can support any existing work that you're doing, just let us know and we'll figure out how we can integrate it in.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, now the nicer part of this is that you can choose a training format. A lot of folks might get a little antsy at the idea of doing an in-person classroom kind of training. So that's one option. We can do an online training, and that can be live or it could be recorded. So we could set you up with a webinar where you have, your number of slides and you can go through those. You can record those, and then the training can be delivered through the recording, so people could access it when they have time, so 24/7. And then there is a blended version, which would be an in-person classroom training with a webinar that's running, and you can use your slides on your own computer. And if you run the webinar from that computer, then people would be able to see what you have in terms of your slides. And just like this, if you have a live phone number or the phone call into the webinar service, you can record it as well. So that can get a little complicated because you have to have somebody in the room who's managing the tech part. And the tech part's not all that complicated, but it's just really hard to do that as the speaker at the same time and then deal with a classroom. But we have been using that approach with another project. It took us some time to get it a little bit more, let's say, user-friendly and not quite as complicated as when we started. But it is a good approach if you think that you'll have folks who want to call in who won't be able to make it into the classroom. And we have all those tools that you can use. Okay. So coming down to the tail end here, Ben is going to be the point of contact for any technical assistance requests. And so his email, if you're looking at the screen, you'll see it all on there, but we'll email this to you if you don't have your computer going. But his email is tcr-ta at NIJC.org. And the phone numbers and fax numbers are listed in there. And all we ask is that once we get your email, give us 3 to 5 days so that if it is outside of our scope that we can find folks to respond to it. And that'll give us a chance to also incorporate general subject matter experts as resources as well, being able to identify what the needs are. Okay, and last but not least, we have an Excel formatted timesheet that you can use to track and turn in hours that you spend when you're developing the training or doing any of the presentation. And this slide shows you, I cropped it off, so we do have 31 there in case there's 31 days in the month, but I cropped it off. And it's basically to address whether or not you are conducting the web conference, if you are prepping for it, which is planning, curriculum development, outreach, technical assistance, or setting up for the webinar, and then the delivery of the actual session itself. So if there's anything that you can put in there, then we ask that you give a very brief explanation as to what it is. It's just essentially documenting the activity. And then we use these for the reports that go back to Cal OES. And we will send all that out with the copy of the slides and the Excel formatted file. And that is it in terms of what we wanted to deliver today. So hopefully we didn't take up too much of your time, but we'll get this all out to you in email. Do you have any questions at all, Doreen?
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. And I don't think anybody else does. I didn't hear any other
I will, when I see Frankie next, I'll go over it with him. I'll talk to him.
Okay, cool. Now I know Frank, he's going to say, Dory, I want you to do this training.
Yeah.
So just let us know what subjects come up, and if it's something that's outside of the current curricula, we probably have resources in the database for it, so you don't have to go searching for too much. But let us know as you go through if you come across any issues or obstacles, and we'll see what we can do to help out.
Sounds good.
Okay, if nobody has anything else, then we will let you go.